Welcome to Behave Yourself, the podcast that aims to bring the science of human behavior and how you can apply it to your own life and become the happiest, healthiest, and most successful version of you.
We're two behaviour analysts with backgrounds in personal training and nutrition who've struggled in the past with confidence, weight loss, breaking promises to ourselves, and constantly trying the quick fixes.
We bring the science and show you how to apply it confidently and consistently towards your own goals and how to actually create a lifestyle change.
Behaviour analysis is the science of human behaviour, and we all engage in behaviours that either move us towards the direction of our goals or hold us back from living the life we desire.
I'm one of your hosts, Emily McRae.
And I'm your other host, Jo Wesley. Hi.
Hello.
How you doing?
I'm good. I know we always dive deeper. I am actually feeling very accomplished this morning. I trained a client and then I actually finally cleaned our kitchen and started on the laundry, which I now realize I need a better system for the kitchen, the dishes, the dishwasher, and everything because midweek gets so crazy and then it just piles up. So
very domesticated.
Doing every night, and I stopped that, so I need to figure out a different system. But we'll get there. But I got it done this morning, and it feels a lot better.
Nice.
How are you behaving yourself?
Yeah, I mentioned in the last podcast I had given myself seriously sore legs after lifting very heavy weights, and so I've been doing lots of stretching because even a week later my legs are still sore, and I now need to work out how to get similar progressive overload in other parts of my body because my arms and chest and back just don't really hurt like my legs and bum do. So yes, I'm good. Stretching.
Write you out a nice program for that.
Oh, thanks. I am excited about today. I said last week that I was really excited about last week's podcast about the functions of human behavior, but today we get to talk about the functions of food, which is so exciting. And actually, I think a lot of the time, sometimes podcasts and people on Instagram sometimes repeat what other people have said, not because they're bad people, but there's only so many things that can be said in the world, and it's good that different people say them in different ways, and all of that is not a bad thing. But actually, whilst researching this, I don't think anyone has done the behavior analytic style functions of food before. So ooh, I think we're breaking new ground.
I'm excited.
Yeah.
Okay.
So today, last podcast, I should say, we went into the functions of human behavior. So sensory, automatic, escape and avoidance, and tangible. And today we're going into the functions of food. I'm sure Skinner would be turning in his grave, and it's not truly behavior analytic, but bear with me. I'm going to do my best because food is amazing. It's wonderful. If you follow me on Instagram, you'll know it's my life and I love nothing more except for my husband and food. But it performs so many functions. And I think too often, some very strict people will say, well, you should only see food as fuel. Well, that sounds miserable to me. Food is so much more than just fuel. So I'm excited to dig into this today.
Me too. Can't wait.
A quick disclaimer at the start, I suppose. This episode isn't intended to make anyone really overthink their food or why they're eating it. It's more just an interesting reflection on all the different functions that we have around food, because as I said, it's not just about fuel. It performs so many different functions. And it's everywhere. Like, it's in our homes. If you're an alcoholic, you could give up alcohol. I am a true foodaholic, but you can never give up food. It's everywhere. We have to have it daily. It's in the media, it's in the newspapers, it's in advertising, it's social, it's all around us, it's everywhere. Mm-hmm. So I guess on the very basics, which we wouldn't cover with the behavior analytic functions of human behavior, but with functions of food, we have a biological function. So food gives us macronutrients, it gives us micronutrients, it gives us phytonutrients, it gives us zoonutrients, it gives us minerals and fibre and water. And all of those are, I guess, the initial intention of food. It's there to give us energy for growth and development, for energy, for repairing and maintaining the body's cells, and for preventing and fighting infections. So there's the very basics of biology around food. And then we get onto the fun stuff. So I actually got some help with this podcast episode because I started thinking about it and looking into it. And as I said, there wasn't a huge amount of research to be done into it. And so I went to the really reputable scientific source known as Facebook and asked for help. And Instagram, people on Instagram helped and asked people what were some of their whys around food. And lots of very lovely people helped me around some of their whys around food. And so then I've gone and taken all their whys, all their functions around food, what food gives them, and categorized it into the 4 functions that we talked about. 5, I've made a 5th function. Again, Skinner would be turning in his grave. A 6th function, we've got biological as well, and classified them by these different functions. And like we talked about in the last episode, I think if you can identify the function of your behavior, whether that's your eating behavior or whatever, and then if you want to change it in some way, you can find a functional replacement. So Emily said last episode about her client who binge eats crunchy food and has functionally replaced it with crunch, instead of crunchy things like chips and cookies, replaced it with, did you say broccoli and raw veggies?
Broccoli and carrots. Yeah.
So she's found a functional replacement. So I'm going to go through these because I think they are fascinating. So people said that some of the social reasons around their whys behind food, why do they eat food, that there were some traditions. For some, it was nostalgic, so it reminded them of a certain time. For socializing, we've all eaten socially. To feel loved, and I guess that makes sense in that one of the very first things our parents do for us is feed us. And so it might make us feel loved. And I know for me, I certainly make food for other people to show my love for them. I'm very much a feeder. It could be cultural. So if you are from a particular culture, you might engage more with certain types of foods than others. It could be social, almost rule based. So someone might say to you, "Oh, you have to try those new cookies from the new bakery on the corner," and it could be the praise or enjoyment that you get from other people when they eat the food that you've made. So all of those would be something that you gain socially from eating food, and if you can work out that that's why you are eating particular foods, you might want to do more of it. And I'm not saying you have to change it, but if you did want to change it or reduce it, maybe you could replace it with something else that you gain socially, whether that's good conversation, social games. It could be anything. It doesn't have to be food necessarily. But also escaping a type of social something. So some people said that they would often engage in eating behaviors. I sound like such a behavior analyst, for goodness sake. Engage in eating behaviors. They eat in social situations to avoid talking to others. So if they go to a party and they're particularly shy or they don't like the people there, they might choose to be at the buffet or sitting alone at a table eating rather than having to go and talk to Auntie Sue or whoever. I don't have an Auntie Sue. That's not me being rude. And one that came up in a private message and I've been chatting to someone about is the idea of eating to cover yourself up. So the idea that overeating and having extra layers of fat socially somehow avoids unpleasant feelings or thoughts, maybe your sexuality. So the idea that some people might choose to overeat to put on extra fat as a form of comfort to cover themselves up. And I think there's validity in that idea and thought, and potentially somewhere that I was many years ago, but I think could probably take a whole podcast to dig into.
That's so interesting to hear that perspective.
I know I read a book many years ago by Louise Hayes who talked about overeating as a form of cover up and comfort. And I'm going to go and dig that book out, actually. She was a very lovely, sensible woman. Oh, I missed 2. I'm sorry. So 2 other social positive behavior functions would be for celebrations and festivities, and almost as somebody's personality type as social. So it's quite often that you'll hear people say, "Oh, like, hi, like, who are you?" And they'll go like, "Oh, I'm Joe and I'm an accountant and I'm keto." Like it's almost part of someone's personality. So whether they're a foodie or they're eco-friendly or they're vegetarian or whatnot, it could be part of their personality. Okay, the next function would be tangible. And there was a lot There were many fewer responses for this than for social. So somebody said that every time they have a cup of tea, they want to have something else in their other hand to either eat, but particularly dunk a biscuit in their tea. Do you dunk biscuits in tea?
I don't, but I mean, I know that that's, I mean, I think some people do.
Okay.
I don't, but I think we definitely get it from you guys of like this more like English way of doing it of like tea and biscuits but I don't. Some people actually will dunk donuts in their coffee, which I believe is where the term Dunkin' Donuts came from.
Ah,
But yeah, I don't personally. But I can see that as like wanting to have something with the coffee and having that or tea and then something on the other hand of like I need to have both hands having something.
yeah. And almost sometimes I guess I'm thinking like I've got a cup of tea and without thinking, do I want a biscuit? Do I need a biscuit? I've already grabbed it, ready to dunk. Another tangible idea was the escape. So they eat because they don't want to waste food, and this is certainly true with the men in my family. My dad, my brother, no, probably not my brother. My dad and my husband certainly. We sometimes will say to them like, "You don't have to be a human dustbin," but they will eat food just because they really don't want it to go to waste. So that could be one, and maybe eating simply because it's there. And certainly over Christmas and times like that, when there's oodles of food around, I'm certainly aware of that, where we just eat food just because it's in front of us.
For sure.
One that I really liked under the tangible function was, I'm going to take a second to work out how to pronounce this. It's a Japanese word, kuchi sabishi. And it's a Japanese word to describe when you're not hungry, but you eat because your mouth is lonely.
Oh.
Which I thought is quite cute. And and as someone that's experimented with fasting and I've done up to a 48-hour fast, I get that. Like there were times during the fast, and we'll go into another podcast episode about why I did that extended fast, but it was interesting to monitor the levels of hunger going up and down with different presumed, I didn't test it, presumed levels of leptin and ghrelin. But there were times when I wasn't hungry, but my mouth was just lonely and I just wanted a crunch or a squish or just something in my mouth because my mouth was lonely.
That's such an I like that.
And actually that was one that I wouldn't have thought of without help from Facebook and Instagram. So yeah, good one.
I wonder if that's like a lot with that kind of bored, mindless eating too, of like you just feel like you need to have something in your mouth and like there,
Yeah.
but you don't need it. It's just that your mouth is lonely. I like that. I'm going with that. I'm going to look into that more.
Tucci Sadifi. And then we get on to the automatic functions or escape functions. The automatic function. So kind of it feels good. So this is an obvious one for food. You enjoy the flavors, you enjoy the textures. Some people said it really perked them up or gave them energy to eat, which makes total sense. It gave them comfort sometimes, or maybe gave them relief. Obviously, relief from hunger would make sense. It could be joyful eating. They're eating because they're happy, or they're eating because they're sad, and they're trying to manage their emotions with food. It could be relief from hunger or pain, or reducing hunger headaches or jitters by eating. It could be, as you said, escaping from boredom or escaping negative emotions, or it could be escaping stress. And I think that's more common than a lot of us probably would like to admit. And I certainly know that if I get an influx of emails, I will suddenly go, well, I must go to the fridge immediately. And I check myself like, no, you've just eaten lunch 20 minutes ago. You really don't need to go to the fridge.
Mm-hmm. And I think there's that on the opposite end of people who are stressed or in an emotional state don't eat, and it's like this, it shuts it completely down. So there's those two sides of it as well, that you almost avoid it because nothing is going to be automatically reinforcing. It's not even enjoyable to eat that food.
Yeah, for sure. And I think, like we talked about last episode, some behaviors can be multifunctional. So we've already talked a lot about escaping and avoiding pain or stress or whatever, but the next one would be to escape or avoid. And somebody said that often pre-COVID, they would choose to eat at a restaurant just to avoid doing the dishes. So I wish I could have your income and afford to do that, but goodness me, that's quite an extent to go to just to avoid doing some dishes. And we don't even have a dishwasher.
Yeah, that's I think a big one is not wanting to like have to cook it, or that time that it takes to make the food and decide it. And you definitely enjoy cooking more than I do, but
Yeah, for sure. What else with escape and avoidance? I just had something in mind and it's gone now. Can you think of any for escape and avoidance?
I mean, I think for escape avoidance too, it's you can end up eating to or like stopping to get food to avoid or delay having to go somewhere. I worked with a client and she would stop at CVS to get candy every single day. And she's like, I'm just stopping and I don't like want to, but I'm doing it. And we figure out she was really trying to delay going back to her work after lunch. And so then we kind of replaced it and we just talked on the phone, or she talked to me, or she talked to a friend or a loved one, and she called somebody on the phone to enjoy that time in between work. And actually like she was like, I don't enjoy eating the candy. It's not, I'm just experiencing guilt afterwards, but she was using it to avoid having to go back to work and kind of delay it longer than needed.
Oh, stink.
I know.
I certainly avoided eating at times because I knew that either the person's house that I was going to has made me sick in the past, or a restaurant particularly that maybe has accidentally fed me gluten in the past. So I certainly avoided certain places for that reason. And I guess the last one is an extra function I've added in. It's not a function, but a reason for eating would be habitual. And again, that could be back to the biscuits in tea. Like I always pick up a biscuit with my tea, or like breakfast. Will I always eat breakfast before I shower? But are you hungry? And I think a lot of people just eat habitually, not necessarily when they are particularly in need of food or hungry. Or they don't eat when they are hungry because it's not meal times and we are so programmed to only eat at certain times of day.
Not interesting. That whole kind of like social component of, well, and we've talked about this too with types of food associated with different types or different times of day, and like, well, why is this food only for breakfast and the rest is for lunch and dinner? You can have quote unquote dinner foods for breakfast. There's no rule against it, but socially it's become this kind of component of this is breakfast food.
Yeah.
And I think it has kind of this more automatic feel, and breakfast foods tend to be more carb filled and warm and kind of cozy feeling. So that may be a function of why.
It's interesting. I'd love to do some more research into that actually, because the breakfast food industry is huge. Things like Kellogg's, and I mean, I'm talking about the UK here, but like the breakfast cereal industry and the bread industry is fairly huge because that's the kind of stuff we eat for breakfast now.
Mm-hmm.
But before those big businesses really happened, I wonder what people really did eat for breakfast. I remember my grandfather talking about where he was brought to England on the Kinder transport from Nazi Germany, and because he was a Jew. And when he arrived at his family that were taking him in, they gave him breakfast of bacon and sausages, which obviously as a Jew, he really shouldn't be eating. And the response was, well, eat it or go hungry, you choose. But they would eat bacon, eggs, and sausages for breakfast every day. And so I wonder actually, have we always eaten very carby things for breakfast, or is that a very recent thing in the last 100 years because of big business?
Ooh, I wonder.
I don't know. I'm going to go and research it.
Research.
Anyway,
I like that.
like we talked about on the last podcast episode, the reason why we kind of look at functions of behaviors is to either dig into the real whys behind our behaviors, or work out if we want to change them or stop them, what we can functionally replace it with. So, for example, if my friend Shona mentioned this, she says that she'll often have chocolate in the afternoon to give her a perk up of energy. And she even called herself out on it before I said anything. She was like, yeah, I could have a banana instead. um, Or if you know that you are avoiding Auntie Sue by eating endlessly at the buffet, what else could you do instead? Could you not go to that family affair? Could you buddy up with your cousin who you get on with instead? Could you replace that escape behavior with something else instead?
Yeah. And you can also, we talked about in one of the holiday episodes, I believe we talked about it a lot in the how to stay sane through the holidays, but kind of those antecedent strategies, those pre strategies of conversation. So if that conversation is really the trigger, what are the things that you can prepare to say during that conversation instead of using the food to avoid it? Just, stop it in its tracks and change that whole dynamic so that you're not in this aversive situation perpetually for every family event.
Yeah. And not to be the person that always says, like, oh, you want to stop this eating behavior, you want to change it. Look for the positive ones as well. Like looking at some of the social ones, looking at like the nostalgia and traditions and cultural, it made me start thinking, oh, yeah, we did used to have that when we were children. I'm going to go and ask my parents for the recipe. Or something that's positive, say, great, go and enjoy it. See what else you can do. Food is wonderful. And there's no end to the resources that you can find with Google now. Any recipe you want for any tradition, culture, nostalgia, whatever food you want, there is a recipe for it somewhere. And if there's not, just make it up. Like food isn't, something that has to be done a certain way. You can play with it and have fun with it.
Challenging for someone like me that wants a recipe written out.
I'll work on it. That's a funny thing, isn't it? I don't know whether it's related to this episode, no. But I'm going to go for it anyway. I posted a picture of frozen yogurt chunks with berries frozen on top. I have never had so many messages on Instagram. Genuinely, if you ask Jim right now, what's the most kind of bland thing I make? It's that. People would, and so I think it would, maybe that's another thing, a function we get from food is the visual, like you almost eat it with your eyes. Mm-hmm. Because this frozen yogurt bark with kind of frosty berries on, and I think it had chopped pistachios on, it looks beautiful. If I'm honest, I think people thought it was white chocolate, not just yogurt.
Yeah, I think I thought it was white chocolate. And then it literally looks like it. I had to triple look. I think I went back into your stories multiple times because it looked like a painting or something. I literally was looking into my screen like, are those 3D? Are those berries in there? I don't know. It looked amazing. And yeah, I think that visual component of, does it look appetizing? Yeah. Does anything I make from Pinterest actually look like what it looked like on Pinterest? Am I going to be more inclined to eat it if it looks enjoyable versus not?
And that's something I'm working on now. So I think you're right. Like this particular dish is like, sorry for listeners, it is just frozen. It's just yogurt, whether Greek yogurt or skyr, with maple syrup if you want it a bit sweeter. I put collagen in just because I'm fancy. And then you spread it on a baking sheet, top it with a few berries and chopped nuts and put it in the freezer for 3 hours and then just chop it into chunks. So it's like in kind of, in quotation marks, a healthier sweet treat that you can have in your freezer. But it's not the most delicious thing. And so it's interesting because I often put recipes and encourage people to eat more healthfully. I'm trying to make my photos more appealing because I know if I put up the most kind of like nutritious bowl of something I've eaten for dinner, but it looks like a dog's dinner, nobody's going to want to eat it. Whereas if I make it look visually appealing, people will go, oh yeah, maybe healthy eating is a good thing. Mm-hmm. But it's interesting because often it's completely unrelated to what the food actually tastes like.
Yeah.
I don't know if you guys had it in the US. When we were children, I reckon it must have been, I don't know, the 1990s. Heinz tomato ketchup, the brand Heinz.
The purple and the green.
Yeah. Do you remember?
Oh yeah, we were just talking about it. I was going to say the other day, it was probably 2 months ago now, time warped. But yeah, we were talking about that. It's so gross to think about that was like, but it tasted the same.
Right, blind taste test, people couldn't tell the difference, but when they could see it, they said they tasted different. So obviously our eyes do taste for us as well.
Yeah, that stuff is so gross.
I never tried it. I've never been allowed it.
I think probably at a friend's house. It certainly was never in my household. We didn't have any brand name anything. It was all very very basic. But yeah, that stuff was less than phenomenal.
Any whys or any functions behind eating or food behaviors you think I might have missed?
We've covered a lot of them. I am a very emotional eater. When I'm stressed, I emotionally eat. That is me, and I've talked about it a lot, but on my Instagram and stuff. But it's hard, and it's hard to sit there. And I did one post one day. It actually got a lot of responses, funny enough, but I did it in a conversation between my brain, my heart, and my stomach, of like this whole conversation that went through my brain maybe in 15, 20 seconds. But I don't feel good. This is going to make it better. I don't actually need it. I'm not actually hungry. And it was all the brain and the heart and the head and everything that just, and it's a very challenging function to replace and shift and modify, but working on it.
I would say I am 20 years into challenging those old kind of like comfort stress eating and like old behaviors learned from childhood around eating. And 20 years later, I'm still working on them. And that's okay. It's fine. And like, I'm still not perfect at it, but yeah, it's a hard one. I guess the only other one that would go back to biological would be quite more and more commonly nowadays. I think it's termed, or no, there's a new word for it, but the more commonly known one is orthorexia, where people are so obsessed with health and fitness. So maybe some people choose their food purely because it is, again, in quotation marks, healthy, not because they actually like it or want it, or it's because it's actually nutritionally good for them. Like if you eat nothing but goji berries, you're going to be quite sick.
Yeah.
Interesting. Yeah.
I love this episode. So
good. I'm excited about the next episode. So the next episode, Emily is going to take the lead with functions of movement.
Yes, I'm excited for it.
Cool.
Get you guys moving.
Where can they find us if they want to ask questions and whatnot?
So you guys can find us on our Facebook group is Behave Yourself Podcast. It's a private Facebook group. You can find me at emily.a.mcrae on Instagram. It's MACRAE. You can find more for Joe at The Behavior Lady. And our Behave Yourself podcast is Behave Yourself Pod. You can also send us an email, behaveyourselfpod@gmail.com. Woo! The long-winded.
Good one. And a quick disclaimer, we're both behavior analysts and qualified in our respective fields, but this podcast is for education and information sharing only and shouldn't be taken as personal, medical, or behavioral advice or services.
Wonderful.
See you next time for Function of Movement.
Perfect.
Bye.
Bye.